Every few months here at Taostats, we like to go back and review how Bittensor's emissions have changed over the last few months. Here we are at the end of September 2025, and it's time for the fall edition of Bittensor Subnet Emissions. At the heart of the Bittensor network is TOAO and TOAO emission. With the launch of DTOAO, every single subnet has an alpha token. There are 128 subnets today, so there are 128 different alpha tokens that all interact with TOAO. So how does alpha interact with TOAO? The only way you can buy and sell alpha is through TOAO. And then with TOAO, you can go and sell that at a DEX and buy other tokens or turn it into dollars or whatever. That all occurs through a subnet liquidity pool. We've got other videos on what liquidity pools are, how they work, slippage, all that sort of thing. But for the point of emission, we need to know that the tau and the alpha that's present in the liquidity pool defines the price of the alpha. So tau in the pool divided by alpha in the pool is going to give us the price of the alpha token. And so whenever you sell alpha, it goes through the liquidity pool at that price to get tau. If you're buying alpha, you take tau, it goes through the liquidity pool, and you get alpha out. So let's talk a little bit about tau emission. Every single block, there is one tau emitted. Bittensor follows the halvening schedule of Bitcoin. And so at 10.5 million tau, which is going to happen in December of this year, the emission is going to drop to half of a tau per block. The reason I brought up liquidity pools earlier is the tau that's emitted is placed in the liquidity pools for all of the different subnets. Now there are a bunch of liquidity pools, right? There's one for every single subnet. The way we define the amount of tau going into a single subnet is we take the price of the subnet and divide it by all of the prices, the sum of subnet prices. And that ratio, when we add up all the tau ins, is going to give us 1. And so the tau in goes into the liquidity pool, and it's the price divided by the sum of all prices. After the halving, we'll have our first halving, and it all gets multiplied by 1/2. So this is the formula when we take halvings into account. So now we've defined where the tau goes. 1 tau per block, half a tau later this year. It all goes into the pool. We know by definition that the price of the alpha token is defined by tau over alpha. So if we have tau going in, we need to have alpha going in as well to keep the price the same. Right? We can't change the price based on emission. We need to keep the price equal. So these two have to balance each other out. So alpha in every single block is defined as the tau in divided by the price. And in reality, the max that alpha in can be is 1. And it's beyond the scope of this video, but if there was ever a time where the tau in divided by the price gave you a value bigger than 1, there's this tau subsidy that takes care of that, and it's all math and it's taken care of. But in general, we're looking at tau in and alpha in. When you every single block, it has to equal the price when you divide the tau in divided by the alpha in. Now we've got the tau in and the alpha in to handle the liquidity pool. Alpha out is what goes to all of the holders, the people who are involved with the subnet, the owner, the miner, the validator, and all of the holders. So how does alpha out get distributed? We have 1 alpha out per block. This will, of course, change at the alpha halving to 1/2. Now, the first alpha halving is a couple years away. I'm not going to put the formula that it goes down to half a block because this video gets remade every 4 or 5 months anyway. So let's look at that alpha out emission. Where does it go? So inside each subnet, we have a bunch of people holding alpha. And so I'm showing you 12 here. But we can break it down into 4 groups. We've got the subnet owner, we've got miners, we've got validators, we've got stakeholders. In reality, they're all stakeholders. They all have alpha staked to a hotkey, but we're just going to break it up into these because that helps us better understand the emission of the alpha out into the subnet. And so we have one alpha out coming in every single block, and it gets distributed to these stakeholders. So let's start at that top with that one alpha out. The first thing that happens is 18% of that alpha gets sent to the subnet owner. There is talk that this might change, but there's not anything concrete or really in planning to change that 18%. I'm feeling pretty solid that it'll be 18% to subnet owners for the near future. Once that 18% is distributed, we've got 82% over here still to be divvied up. Right now, that is divvied into two equal proportions of 41% each. There is a proposal to change this, to be able to slide this back and forth, not 50-50, but maybe 90-10 or 10-90 or 100-0, whatever. Right now, it's 50-50. 50% of that goes to the miners. So 41% of that original one alpha goes to the miners. And once it goes to those miners, we can look on the metagraph and look at the incentive. And the incentive is the percentage of how much each miner is going to get. So 1.14%, 1.12%, 1.03%. This is actually from a subnet earlier today. So this 41% gets divvied up amongst all of the miners who have incentive. There is a way on chain to burn all of the miner distribution. This gets really interesting when you start thinking that we can move the miner validator proportion to different values. But right now it's 50%, and some of it, all of it can get burned, some of it can't get burned. And so we're just going to show both of them here as options. So that leaves us back with this light yellow remaining 41% of that one alpha out. We're going to stretch this out because there's a lot going on here. And then we're going to zoom out a little bit. We're going to have TOAO. We're going to have our subnet. We're going to have our liquidity pool in between. Because the emission going to the validators and the stakeholders is divvied up based on the root proportion. The root proportion for a new subnet is 100%, meaning that all of this 0.41 alpha goes to root stakeholders. And then over time, the alpha proportion increases, the root proportion decreases until we're sort of at a state like this. The root proportion of alpha is sold through the liquidity pool as TOAO and distributed to those who have staked en route. The remaining, the alpha proportion, is distributed to the validators and the stakeholders on the subnet. So if we go back to this picture, we add TOAO off in the distance. A percentage, the root proportion, goes off to the root stakeholders, and then this remaining bit gets split up via the validator take. Most validators have a take. It's usually between 0 and 18%. That goes to the validator, and the remaining bit will go to the stakeholders of those validators. Now, in reality, I simplified the root proportion. The root proportion does the same thing. It gets split up into a validator bit and into a stakeholder bit, and then that is distributed to the validator and the stakeholders en route. So here we are with another drawing of the same thing where we've zoomed out so we can see the TOAO, we can see the liquidity pool, we can see our subnet with the different stakeholders and the way the alpha is divvied up between all of those holders. We also have the TOAO in and the alpha in coming into the liquidity pool every single block. And while this tells an almost complete story, we're not quite done yet. With the launch last week, we now have this idea of subnets or subnet mechanisms, where instead of one mechanism, you can have two mechanisms that power these subnet. And so each mechanism has a different percentage of the emissions. And so in this case, maybe it's 50-50. And that miner emission would be split 50-50. So would the validator emission, so would the stakeholder emission. You could also, as a subnet owner, make 175, 125. So if you split this 40.41, more of it goes to this mechanism than goes to that mechanism. Right now, the maximum number of mechanisms in a subnet is 2, but there are ideas that it might go as large as 10, in which case the 0.41 would be split up amongst all the different 10 mechanisms, and then the same with the validator and the stakeholders. It really doesn't matter where you divvy it up. It all gets summed back together to a single metagraph at the end to be awarded to all of the stakeholders in the subnet. So you get a little bit of award for all 10. That all gets summed up, and you'll see a number that's very similar to the numbers that we had before, assuming that you as a miner or that your validator is participating in all of these subnet mechanisms. But as it stands today, we're generally looking at 1 or 2 subnet mechanisms at a time. And then this is sort of the overall view of how tau and alpha are distributed to the different places in a subnet and to the different participants of a subnet. Stay tuned to Taostats. We always try to keep you up to date on the latest changes and updates to the Bittensor network. And thank you for watching.